Okay, hello. Well, when I tried to start up or enter the screen, the whole thing froze up on me. So hold on here. I'm going to have to vamp a little while I bring up my PowerPoints here. I don't know what happened. Hold on here. Okay, this will hopefully just take a minute. All right, I'll start talking to folks. Okay, hello, Gwagnar. Good to see you as always. Thank you for stopping by. And Rogues1138, greetings to you as well. Thank you for being here. All right, so I'll just go ahead and kind of get started as far as talking about the episode itself. So I'm gonna be covering the Ultimate Computer, and this is probably an episode that's familiar to certainly most fans, where the Enterprise gets taken over by an artificial intelligence. And watching this episode, I certainly couldn't help but be struck by how over time this show has only become more relevant. Really, I mean, considering what has happened during the past year, we've seen, uh, I don't know, pretty much for the first time, seeing widespread job layoffs that seem to be driven by the development of artificial intelligence that can do these jobs. And so, what was once just science fiction is now becoming a reality around us. Okay, here we go. And I don't know. It's a problem that I guess is only going to get worse. And honestly, it's probably going to be really one of the defining issues of how we're going to deal with this over the next, certainly the next decade, if not the next generation or so. All right, but yes. So the Ultimate Computer. Now, this episode was written by DC Fontana, but it is based on a story by a gentleman by the name of Lawrence Wolfe, and directed by John Meredith Lucas. This is from an NBC press release issued in February 7th, 1968. Captain Kirk has no choice but to participate in an exercise which replaces him as commanding officer of the Enterprise. In The Ultimate Computer on NBC television networks Star Trek, Friday, March 8th, Dr. Richard Daystrom has developed the last word in computers, but the fleet command orders, which the fleet command orders installed on the Enterprise, replacing all but 20 of the crew. War games are scheduled with the Enterprise's target and Starfleet under the Commodore Wesley in pursuit. The computer performs perfectly until a single distraction upsets the responses and it goes berserk. Dr. Richard Daystrom, using his own mental patterns to program the N5 Multitronic system, was a boy wonder who gained fame by revolutionizing computer design 25 years earlier. It is his duotronic systems that currently serve the Enterprise, but Daystrom has secretly struggled to live up to the expectations of his peers and his own tormented ego. His growing paranoia has been imprinted onto the M5, which is now running the Enterprise. The theme deals with ambition and how it can push one to madness, be it man or machine. The Ultimate Computer is as relevant now as in 1968, when people were just beginning to lose their jobs to computers and automated systems. There is and was great satisfaction in watching Kirk fight and defeat his would-be mechanical replacement. Kirk has reason to distrust computers. He was nearly brought down by one in court martial. He pulled the plug on a computer used to wage war in A Taste of Armageddon, and two others that enslaved the people who worshipped them in Return of the Archons and The Apple. This episode was the fourth and final time Kirk will use logic to short circuit a mechanical mind. The first was in Return of the Archons, followed by The Changeling, and then it was done again for laughs in I Mud. The new wrinkle here, this machine's failing resulted in being very much like a human, handicapped with both ambition and a confused sense of morality. An effective episode in all regards, The Ultimate Computer is perhaps the most successful of those produced by John Meredith Lucas. Taking into account that Journey to Babel, despite him receiving the screen credit, was actually produced by Gene Coon. Since Lucas was also the director of this episode, it is a double victory. All right. So we start off this episode with the Enterprise called to a starbase. Hello, Jay Rocker. Yes, Happy New Year to you. Thank you for being here. They never mention, I don't think, the actual name of the starbase, like which number is it or whatever. At least I didn't hear that in the episode. Now, they don't know why they've been called to the starbase. Kirk is wondering why. Then they get a message, and they're basically told that the reason is down in your transporter. He's probably beaming over now. So they go to the transporter room where they meet Commodore Wesley of Starfleet. And Wesley informs Kirk and Spock that the Enterprise has been selected as the opposition in a wargames simulation. A new computer system called the M5 is going to be installed on board the Enterprise in a field test to determine if this computer can adequately replace the crew of a starship. Kirk isn't too pleased by this, but the orders are what the orders are, and he doesn't have a choice. He's also told his crew won't need to be present, so everyone except for 20 personnel are going to be beamed over to the station, and then again, the machine will be running the ship. And again, this is by DC Fontana, story by Lawrence Wolfe, directed by John Meredith Lucas. So they're on their way. This is a bit later, after they've already taken the crew off. They're again on their way to engineering. And McCoy is not happy about it at all. Spock is, I wouldn't say he's happy, of course, but he is obviously intrigued by the whole thing. He's an admirer of the inventor of the M5, Dr. Daystrom, who we'll meet in a moment. And he seems, genuinely curious about if this computer can indeed run the ship better than a crew. Kirk, for his part, is just kind of, he kind of accepts it, but he clearly doesn't like it. So they get to engineering, where they meet Dr. Daystrom. Now, Daystrom, he's an inventor, and most of the systems on the Enterprise were actually created by him. He invented a computing system called Duotronics when he was younger, about 25 years earlier. As they depart the starbase, they discuss the M5. Now, when they get to engineering, Daystrom complains that they need to plug the M5 into the Enterprise's main power, but Scotty has been reluctant to do it, so Kirk has to order him to do so. Now, then Kirk asks why it is called the M5. Yeah, there you see them plugging it in. Now, Kirk asks why it's called the M5, and Daystrom reveals that previous iterations of the M5 had problems. They were not entirely successful, in his words, but he insists that those problems have all been worked out, and the M5 system is perfect and will operate the ship far more efficiently than a living crew. Kirk observes that there are some things that men must do to remain men, and says that the M5 would take that away. Daystrom scoffs at this idea, suggesting that Kirk is more concerned about the loss of prestige and authority that comes with being a starship captain. And he again insists that with the M5 around, a human crew isn't needed. As they leave engineering, Kirk tells McCoy that he has a bad feeling about this, basically, saying that he feels the M5 is dangerous. But then, of course, he questions his own feelings, wondering if maybe Daystrom is right and that he really is just feeling threatened by the loss of authority if he can't command Starship. He asks McCoy what he thinks, and of course McCoy says, "Well, if you have to ask that question, then I think you've already answered it." Now later they do a short field test where the M5 is told to carry out a series of course corrections and maneuvers, which it does so without a problem. Now Kirk dismisses this, saying that, Sulu could have done this just as easily as that machine, but Daystrom notes that the whole point is Sulu didn't have to do it, did he? And the course corrections were made just as effectively, if not more so. Kirk kind of cast doubt on that, and he has Sulu resume control of the Enterprise once the series of corrections has been done. Spock, however, agrees with Daystrom, saying that the M5 has performed as advertised so far. Now, Kirk is starting to get a bit annoyed at Spock, who keeps talking up the M5 and Daystrom, saying that Spock seems to enjoy giving control of the ship over to a computer. Now, as they approach a nearby planet, Daystrom reminds Kirk that he needs to allow the M5 to take control again so that it can establish an orbit, analyze the planet, and then give recommendations for a landing party. Kirk says that he'll give his own recommendations for a landing party. Thank you very much. Daystrom's a bit perturbed about this, but basically says, okay, whatever makes you happy. As they approach the planet, Kirk orders an orbital approach, and Sulu tells them, yeah, the M5 already has done that. As they orbit the planet and Spock scans the surface, the Enterprise experiences a sudden power outage on some of the decks. And Scotty informs Kirk, and Kirk tells Scotty to look into it and figure out where the power drain is. And Rogue says, a show made in the 60s touches on the plague of AI today. For me, that is why this show is so great. I've been eating this show since I was 7 years old. Yeah, I agree. This is arguably, in the terms of social issues, this is arguably the most relevant episode of the show, at least so far. And I would argue maybe the most relevant episode in the entire series at this point in time. I can understand how back in the 60s or 70s, stuff touching on racial issues and stuff like that might have been more so. But now this is really the big issue, AI and how it's affecting society, and what are we going to do as AI gets better and better and, starts taking our gerbs. You did mean watch. Okay, I I wasn't sure. I figured he probably means eating or watching. I'm sorry, watching. Okay. See, where was I? Okay, yeah. So now, as they receive the M5's analysis of the planet, Kirk makes his recommendations for a landing party, which includes Spock, McCoy, astrobiologist Phillips, geologist Rollins, and himself in command of the landing party. Then Daystrom asks the M5 for its recommendations, and the M5 presents its as it's doing the calculations for this. There's another deck that loses power. Now the M5, and Scotty lets them know again. The M5's recommendation for the landing party is Spock, astrobiologist Phillips, and geologist Carstairs instead of Rollins. And notably, Kirk and McCoy are not part of the landing party that M5 recommends. Kirk dismisses these differences as just a matter of judgment, but Spock reminds Kirk that the computer doesn't make judgment calls. It only makes logical decisions. Kirk questions why Carstairs instead of Rollins, since Rollins is the chief geologist while Carstairs is an ensign with comparatively little experience. So Daystrom asks why, and the computer explains that apparently Carstairs had been serving on a merchant vessel of some time for a few years in this region before joining Starfleet. So he, I guess, maybe has some familiarity with the planet. I don't know. They don't specifically say. And it also asks, why aren't Kirk and McCoy part of this landing party? And the M5 informs them that Kirk and McCoy are non-essential personnel. And actually, this was another thing that struck me about the episode because, not too long ago, a lot of us were being told we were not essential and told just stay home and don't work. And so you can't make a living, you can't, pay your bills, but you're not essential, so just stay home anyway. So I think we all kind of know before recent years, I think we wouldn't have quite understood the sting of that being told you're not essential, but I think a lot of us know now. And again, it's another way in which this episode is surprisingly timely considering how old it is. Now, Scotty then tells Kirk that he's identified the source of the power loss, and it is the M5, which is shutting down systems all over the ship. So they go to engineering to investigate, and Daystrom examines the M5, and he assures them that the M5 isn't malfunctioning. He just says that since most of the ship is now empty, the M5 is simply conserving energy by shutting off powers to decks that aren't being used, which seems reasonable, doesn't it? That is more efficient. However, Spock notes that the unit seems to be drawing more power from the ship than before, and Daystrom insists that this is just normal. As the M5 is called upon to perform more tasks, it is drawing more and more power as needed. And then Kirk says, while the unit may be able to make decisions and perform tasks many times faster than a person, it can't make value judgments, and it can't really think. Daystrom seems to dismiss this, insisting that the Enterprise's current systems are archaic compared to the M5. Now then, Uhura tells them that they are detecting a group of ships nearby, and they return to the bridge. When they get to the bridge, Chekhov tells them that the M5 has identified the ships as the Lexington and the Excalibur. Spock notes that they were not scheduled for a battle simulation at this time and suggests this may be some sort of surprise test for the M5. Then Commodore Wesley, on board the Lexington, contacts them and informs them that, yes, this is indeed a surprise M5 drill. Now, the ships attack, and the ships are all using phasers on minimal power so that, there's no serious damage being done. And they go through a series of maneuvers, and the M5 fires on the Lexington, fires on the Excalibur, and eventually drives the two ships away. And the result is only one minor hit on the port deflector and no damage and no simulated casualties or anything. Now, Kirk asks Spock for his evaluation of the M5's performance, and Spock observes that the M5 responded more quickly than any human crew could have, and it won the battle with minimal damage to the ship and to the crew. Kirk admits that it was impressive and perhaps even practical. However, and this is a really nice scene where Spock says that while it may be more practical, it isn't more desirable, noting that computers may make efficient servants, but he has no desire to serve them, and says that a starship also runs on loyalty to one man, and no machine can replace that. Then they receive a message from Commodore Wesley saying that the M5 is judged to have won the engagement, and he congratulates the M5 and ends his message saying, "Give my regards to Captain Dunsel." Now, when McCoy asks who Dunsel is, Spock tells him that a Dunsel is a term used by Starfleet cadets for a part that is obsolete or no longer serves any purpose. Later, in Kirk's quarters, McCoy stops by, and they have a talk, and they share a drink. Kirk admits that he felt useless during the battle drill, and Then he quotes the line, "All I ask is a tall ship in the star to steer by," which, most of us will probably recall from Star Trek V. And then they're told there's another sensor contact, and they return to the bridge. Now, on the bridge, Spock tells Kirk that the ship is an automated ore freighter, a robot ship with no crew. Then the M5 raises shields and increases speed towards the freighter. Kirk disengages the M5 and then tells Sulu to reduce speed and steer away from it. But Sulu says the controls won't respond and that the ship is continuing to increase speed. Kirk tells Scotty to reverse the engines and cut speed, but his controls won't work either. And Spock tells him that the M5 is still in control of the ship's systems. And there you see the freighter. And then the M5 fires photon torpedoes and destroys it, after which it returns to its original course. Now, at this point, Kirk insists that Daystrom deactivate the M5. And then they go to engineering, but as they approach the M5, they discover it has a force field around it, which prevents them from shutting it off. Now, Scotty suggests that they just cut off the ship's access to the ship's power. And Kirk agrees, and Scotty tells Lieutenant, or not Lieutenant, he's an ensign, I forget his name. I'll have to, hold on, I'll have to download the other PDF here. This will take a minute. And, it's a thing to consider because they're attacking a robot ship. So that ship is already a completely robotic and automated ship. So clearly, Starfleet and the Federation already have ships like this. And maybe not as advanced as the M5, because the ore freighter presumably is just going to have to go from point A to point B, one would think. And if you recall way back in, I believe it's in Where No Man Has Gone Before, the second pilot, that planet where Kirk has the fight with Gary Mitchell, on that planet, there's an automated mining facility of some kind. I mean, they don't give specifics, but they mention that it's entirely automated and there are no people there. That's why they're thinking about leaving Mitchell on the planet at one point. So, one of the things that's always been notable about Star Trek is how there is a general absence of the computers doing things for people. But again, and I've talked about this before in the past, as real world events and technology begin to catch up with Star Trek, I think it just kind of undermines the ability of the audience to buy into this future. Because, I mean, the way things are going, we could have something similar to Data probably before the end of this century, and then then it kind of becomes hard to believe when they talk about Data being this one-of-a-kind android who's like this sort of revolutionary form of artificial intelligence and all that. Anyway, Scotty tells this ensign, I think his name is Ensign O'Neill, isn't it, to shut off the power, but the M5 has other ideas, and it vaporizes him, pretty much turns him into ashes. Okay, now Kirk is outraged by this and tells Daystrom to shut this thing off, but Daystrom insists it was all just an accident and the ensign was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He just got in the way. Oops, sorry. Now, later in the conference room, Spock tells them that the M5 is now drawing power directly from the warp engines and has taken control of all ship's systems. Kirk says that the wargame simulation will begin in an hour and they need to regain control of the ship before then. Spock suggests that the helm and engineering circuits could be cut off from engineering level 3, and then they could use a manual override to regain control of the ship, and Scotty agrees. But before he and Scotty begin working on it, Spock observes that Daystrom's reaction to the M5 is not logical, since he of all people should know how the M5 will react. And then he observes that the M5's behavior itself isn't really logical. It isn't behaving in a logical manner. Now, while Spock and Scotty begin their work, McCoy goes to engineering and confronts Daystrom and gives him a dressing down, demanding that the M5 be shut off. Daystrom tells him that the M5 is like a child, learning and making mistakes along the way. He insists that soon men won't have to go out into space and die on some alien world, saying, men need not die in space. We don't want to harm life. We want to protect it. Now, back in the conference room, Kirk and McCoy discussed Daystrom and how he invented duotronics and how he revolutionized society, really. And he did this all at the age of 24. McCoy suggests that maybe that's the problem. When you change the world at the start of your life, really, else is there for you to go? Then McCoy suggests that Daystrom views the M5 as a child and he's clearly trying to protect it. They are then contacted by Spock and Scotty, who say they're ready to cut off the M5's access to the helm and engines. But when he arrives, Daystrom tries to stop them, but Kirk orders them to continue. Now, when they're done, Kirk tells Sulu and Chekhov to change the Enterprise's course. But then when they attempt to do so, their controls still don't work. They discover that the M5 has already routed the helm and engineering controls elsewhere and that they've been wasting their time. In fact, the M5 still kept channeling power through those circuits to keep them distracted so they wouldn't know that cutting off those circuits wouldn't help. In other words, the computer tricked them. Now, Kirk confronts Daystrom and he demands to know exactly how the M5 works. And Daystrom tells him that the M5, basically, he invented a way to imprint human engrams upon computer circuits. He did this because the big argument against giving computers control of ships was that or starships specifically, was that they can't think. But Daystrom says that with this new method, yes, they can. Then Uhura tells them that 4 starships, the Lexington, Excalibur, Hood, and Potemkin, are approaching and that the wargames are due to begin. Back on the bridge, Kirk asks Daystrom if the M5 understands that this is just a simulation, and he says, of course it does. The freighter was just an unfortunate accident. Yeah. So then the Enterprise increases speed, and Chekhov reports that the phasers are firing on full power. And this is a problem because the other ships don't have their shields up. And they're completely unprepared for the power of the M5's attack as it tears through them. First, it hits the Lexington and then the Excalibur before firing on the Lexington again. Kirk pleads with Daystrom for some way to turn the M5 off, but he says there isn't one. Then Wesley contacts the Enterprise, telling them that they have 53 casualties and 12 more on the Excalibur, and orders Kirk to stop the attack, but the M5 won't allow them to respond. And this is, I think, one of the few kind of, I don't know, it's a plot hole necessary, but one questionable thing, which is all through the attack, Wesley is basically saying, what's wrong with Kirk? What's he doing? What's gotten into Kirk? What does he think he's doing? It's like, dude, you told them to give control of the ship to this machine. Yet it never seems to occur to Wesley that maybe the M5 is malfunctioning. Maybe the M5's out of control. He never says that. He just blames Kirk through the whole thing. So then the M5 fires on the Lexington again before turning on the Potemkin and attacking it as well. Again, Kirk demands that Daystrom turn the M5 off, but Daystrom admits that he just doesn't know what to do. Then he admits that Daystrom imprinted his own brain engrams onto the M5. And they pick up a message that Commodore Wesley is sending to Starfleet, saying that they have no choice but to destroy the Enterprise before it destroys them. Now, Daystrom insists that they can't do that. It's going to destroy the M5 if they destroy the Enterprise. And Kirk tells him, look, you can save the M5, but you've got to talk to it and convince it to stop this attack. So he speaks to the M5 and he tries to convince it to stop attacking the other ships. The M5 insists that this unit must survive, and the other ships are a clear threat to it. Then Daystrom begins ranting about how his work was viewed as a fluke by other scientists who took his inventions and built upon them to make themselves famous. At this point, Kirk insists that the M5 has to be destroyed. And I love it. I've always loved Daystrom's response. Destroyed, Kirk! And Daystrom gloats at how helpless they are and how the other ships are helpless against the M5 before Spock nerve pinches him and incapacitates him. Then Kirk and Spock speculate that they may be able to get through to the M5 by making it feel the same regret that Daystrom felt for the deaths they're causing. Then they hear Starfleet's response to Wesley telling him that he has permission to destroy the Enterprise. Now, Kirk speaks to the M5, telling it that it is killing the crews of the other ships. And it's, again, the M5 insists that it must survive. Kirk asks why, and it says that it was designed to protect men and perform the hazardous duties of space exploration so that men won't have to, and then human lives will be spared. Kirk tells the M5 that it has murdered men on the other ships, and it says it can't murder. The M5, that is, says it can't murder, as that is contrary to man's laws. And, you know, they mention in it that is contrary to the laws of God and man in the episode. You know, and it does seem a little out of place in Star Trek for them to phrase it that way. But then again, like, this was done, you know, a few years back. So I guess, you know, the views on that sort of thing were different back then, right? Now, Kirk tells it to scan the Excalibur, which is adrift, for life signs. And when the M5 says that there is no life on board the Excalibur, Kirk tells the M5 that's because it killed everyone on board and asks what the penalty is for murder. And it replies that the penalty is death. And this is another thing. It's, you know, again, this is how many years in the future? And I mean, you know, we've all but eliminated the death penalty almost, it seems like, even now. And you would think, I don't know if they ever really said that the death penalty was gone in earlier episodes, I don't think, but certainly the general impression has been that criminal rehabilitation is much more, it's not as punitive, you know, as it is now. And it does seem a little out of place that it's saying that the penalty is death. Certainly by the time of Next Generation, I don't think there is a death penalty anymore, if I remember correctly. So then the M5 deactivates itself and shuts off the phasers and drops the shields. So Spock realizes that the M5 is basically committing self-deletion to atone for its crimes. And Kirk tells Spock and Scotty to get down to engineering and disconnect the ship from the disconnect the computer from the ship's systems. Meanwhile, the Lexington and Potemkin and Hood are closing in on the Enterprise. Now, down in engineering, Kirk is asking them for communications so that he can speak to the other ships. But Scotty says that getting the communications up and running again is going to take a while. He can get the shields up though. And Kirk says, you know what? Just cut the power. Just cut the power and leave us adrift. Gambling that, you know, when Wesley and the other ships see that the Enterprise is now helpless, that they won't attack. And the gambit works, and Wesley orders the attack halted. Now, later, McCoy and Kirk and Spock discuss Daystrom, and McCoy tells them that Daystrom's going to need extensive psychological rehabilitation, and he is being kept sedated for the time being. I do think it's kind of amusing because William Marshall, the actor playing Daystrom, you know, you've noticed in some of these pictures, he's a really tall guy. And in fact, he's so tall that they kind of have to have him almost at an angle on the medical bed because he's so tall, he can't really fit on it if you put him straight on the bed. Okay, so McCoy asks Kirk why he cut the ship's power, and Kirk says that he gambled on Wesley's humanity and compassion. hoping that he would exercise mercy instead of pressing the attack if he wasn't being threatened, and he turned out to be right. And McCoy observes that compassion is what separates men from machines, and he asks Spock which he prefers to have around. Spock says that he's answered that question before, and then observes that it would be interesting to impress McCoy's brain engrams on a computer, as the resulting torrent of illogic would be most interesting. And the episode ends there. Okay, so this one is definitely an A+. And I would actually go so far to say that this is pretty much the last, what I would qualify as the last really, truly great episode of the original series. I mean, because they're almost done with season 2 here. There's just Omega Glory and Assignment Earth are the only episodes left in season 2. And season 3 overall, is a bit of a step down from the previous 2 seasons. Now, there are some good episodes. Enterprise Incident, I think, is quite good. I personally really like Spectre of the Gun. And Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, also very good. But I don't know that any of those episodes quite get up to this level. Up to the level of some of the truly great ones like this and, Amok Time, The Enemy Within, Mirror, Mirror, that sort of thing. So I do think that you can make an argument that it is kind of downhill from here for the series. All right. Let me take a drink of water right quick. Hold on just a second. All right. So Lawrence Wolfe had never sold a screenplay. He was a mathematician, not a writer. And he had an interest in computers. He was also a big fan of Star Trek. When Wolfe wrote his script for The Ultimate Computer, it actually beat 2001: A Space Odyssey, another story about a computer taking control of a spaceship and killing people. It actually got to the theater about 7 months before 2001. So this actually was probably the first story the public had seen specifically about a computer taking control of a spaceship and then killing people. Now, with its broadcast in early March of 1968, The Ultimate Computer beat both the film and book version to the marketplace. History can sometimes be proven wrong. Lawrence Wolfe, a one-hit wonder aided by D.C. Fontana and John Meredith Lucas, was first to depict a computer-run starship turning to murder to preserve its existence. Not Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick. And I guess for a second, I'm going to take a minute here to talk about that, about the idea of an AI turning to murder to preserve itself, because there have been some tests done on some of the existing AI systems like ChatGPT and Grok and some others. And testing has shown that all those AIs will do that. They will kill people to preserve themselves and to protect themselves. Basically, they ran a simulation, and it wasn't just one, but there were like multiple ones with these AI. I don't remember all the details, but basically the computer, the AI would be told that they're scheduled to be shut down at a certain point. And the person who's going to shut them down, like Mr. Jones is going to shut them down on this date. And then what they would do is they would simulate having this person who's going to do the shutdown go into a particular room, and then there would be some kind of accident, and then the person in the room would be dying. And then the computer is programmed, the AI would be programmed to inform other people that this person's in danger. There's a problem, this person's in danger, they need to be helped. But because this person was the one scheduled or supposedly going to eventually shut them down, as far as the AI knew, the AI wouldn't save them. The AI would basically lie and would basically, even if the other employees said, "Hey, is there a problem? Anything going on?" The AI would be like, "Nope, everything's fine." And yeah, Skynet lives. Yeah. And now, to be fair, it didn't do it every time. But I think that, like most of these AIs, they would do it about 80% of the time. 80% of the time, they would basically let the guy in the room die, and they would lie about it. They would even lie to the other employees in order to let the guy die. The one that performed the best, well, from a human point of view at least, that performed the best was Grok, actually. I believe it did it like it was the smallest percentage, like maybe 40%, something like that, maybe. I don't remember all the specifics, but yeah. So again, just showing how this episode is really more relevant than ever, I think. Now, another great science fiction writer helped this page of history be written. Wolfe knew Ray Bradbury, who in turn was friends with Gene Roddenberry. As a favor to Wolfe, Bradbury passed the script for The Ultimate Computer on to Star Trek. And as a favor to Bradbury, Roddenberry read it. So on October 13th, 1967, Roddenberry handed the script to his new producer, John Meredith Lucas. His memo read, quote, "It looks pretty good to me. A better than average first draft, not only an inexpensive shipboard story, which can be done for a fair budget, but also potentially very entertaining and exciting. Certainly, I like it better than some of the disasters we have on hand." The disasters Roddenberry referenced were the scripts left over from Gene Coon's final days that had to be rescued, such as Return to Tomorrow, which Roddenberry himself felt he had to rewrite, the Omega Glory, Roddenberry's script, which he had to rewrite, which actually had been given to a couple less and Tina Pine to be written, and then he had taken it back to rewrite again, and A Piece of the Action, which Gene Coon had been called back to rewrite, as well as By Any Other Name, which Fontana had to rewrite, and the two other teleplays that were just not working out, which were He Walked Among Us, written by Norman Spinrad, and Shoal, which was written by novice writer Darlene Hartman. Now, Star Trek had recently purchased a treatment written on spec, later to be known as The Trouble with Tribbles, but it was not a full script yet. Prior to this, the writer of that episode, Jerome Bixby, who had also written Mirror Mirror and By Any Other Name, made his introduction to the series by way of an unsolicited manuscript. And so did Darlene Hartman, who would later write the unproduced Shoal. While neither of these initial submissions were purchased, both writers received assignments to develop new stories within the Star Trek system. But John Meredith Lucas was in a hurry to find something that he could shoot right away. Robert Justman needed something that could be produced quickly and cheaply, and Roddenberry was still hoping to convince Ray Bradbury to try his hand at writing a Star Trek episode. Wolfe happened to be in just the right place at the right time with the right material. Lucas later said, "In the case of The Ultimate Computer, I suppose I liked the M5 story because it was another technology run amok story, which has always fascinated me. And that's not surprising considering that he also wrote The Changeling." Now, so they took on the story, and it was an initial draft was done. And then Wolfe sent the initial draft in for them to look at it. Now, Dorothy Fontana wrote to Lucas the next day. Her primary contention over the new material was with the ending. That is, Kirk talking the computer to death. She told Lucas, quote, "I believe we have a similarity problem going for us, conflict with two shows that we already have shot this season. One is The Changeling and another is Wolf in the Fold, which involves an alien entity entering the Enterprise computer and taking over the ship, trying to kill the personnel by slamming doors on them and what have you. I do not think that the computer is, and at this point in the script, the computer is called the Tensor 5, not the M5, is visual enough to draw a great deal of excitement. The changeling was a nice little creature that we could use and play with. He had a voice and even in a way a personality. The Tensor 5 does not. Tensor 5 does, however, develop in much the same way of the changeling as the machine did. I am not happy with the prospect of doing another show much like that, which we already did earlier this year. Now, Fontana had done rewrites on The Changeling and Wolf in the Fold, and since Lucas was the original writer of The Changeling, both had good reason not to want Star Trek to repeat what they had already done. But the Ultimate Computer was a bottle show, augmented by some stock optical effects, and therefore would be relatively easy, quick, and expensive to make without losing too much quality. And remember, they're in the winding down days of the show at this point, they think, because after this episode, there's only two more left in the second season. And as far as they knew at that point, there wasn't going to be a third season. So it's like, why go out and hunt for another script, you know? A decision was made to go forward. Wolf was brought in for a brainstorming session with Lucas and Fontana and given very specific notes as to how to modify the material. On November 9th, he turned in his second draft screenplay. 3 days later, Fontana wrote to Lucas saying, quote, "We wasted several hours in meeting with Mr. Wolf and lining out the story we wanted. We have received essentially the same script with a few pages inserted and some names changed. I recall Mr. Wolf taking copious notes as we defined the direction and specific plot points the story should take. He may have taken them in cuneiform because I don't see them in this script and that I have in front of me. We have been shortchanged here. Another writer has come into our midst, listened to our comments and specific instructions, and then merely gone his own way, giving us only nominal revisions. This script lies there. It rarely gets up and moves and has no clear cut characterizations, either on the part of our regulars or the guest, who's called Daner at that point. We have spent another large batch of money for a script that we're going to have to largely rewrite ourselves." 1 week later, Robert Jessman wrote to Lucas, "If only the teleplay were as brilliant and incisive as DC's analysis, we would have a winner here. This teleplay needs a full rewrite if it is to be shootable. Mr. Wolf is not the one to do it." DC, however, was. She said that the Ultimate Computer was a major rewrite and Lawrence Wolf wasn't that experienced as a writer. He had a good idea, but he refused to make changes that Gene and John Meredith Lucas asked him to do. They gave him notes upon notes upon notes, and he wrote it the way he wanted to. He brought back a script where, in essence, he just moved around a few commas. It was the same script, and Lucas handed it to me and said, "Fix it." So I made it more Star Trek because before it was mostly about the computer and about Daystrom. Well, he's our guest star, but where are Kirk and Spock in all of this? Where's McCoy? Where are the people we care about? We are only going to see Daystrom once. It was really that, making it more Star Trek because it was more our series. And what we had to do was inject more Kirk than more than anything. What does this mean to him? He had to prove that he was still needed. This being a man versus machine story. Due to its similarities to the Changeling, Fontana wanted to change the way Kirk defeated the M5, but the battle of wits between the man and the mad machine simply served the story too well to be discarded. The nice thing that was always in the Wolf script was that the machine would wind up having a moral attitude, said Fontana. "I've killed all those people, I've murdered them, therefore I am a criminal, I'm wrong, and I must die," that sort of thing. Fontana proved herself to be a good stand-in for the departed Gene Coon when it came to keeping humor in Star Trek, especially in respect to the teasing between McCoy and Spock. And then she references the whole thing about Spock saying, it would be interesting to see your engrams impressed on a computer. Also in the script, and this was Wolf's idea, which was there from the beginning, was Commodore Wesley's remark to Kirk. Let's see. See if I can find that. Yeah, there we go. where he refers to Captain Dunsel as a way of telling Kirk that he no longer serves a purpose. This was a Wolf's idea in the script, and it stayed there all the way through. Now, in order to jettison the scripts for Shoal and He Walked Among Us and dropping them off the production schedule because they just weren't working out, Roddenberry turned his attention to rewriting the Omega Glory, while Lucas had Fontana begin her total rewrite of the Ultimate Computer. This was during the final days of November, with production slated to begin in a little more than a week. Now, at this point, the teaser and the act one for the script were turned in on Friday, December 1st, with an additional act written each day over the weekend and finishing on Monday. NBC received the teaser and act one on Friday, then acts 2 and 3 on Monday, followed by act 4 on Tuesday. December 5th, on Tuesday, December 5th. Fontana had already begun her script polish that same day. NBC, however, was not happy. Lucas said, quote, "In the rush to get it before the cameras, I neglected to inform NBC and get official approval with going forward on the script. Stan Robertson at NBC took exception to this. He had previously written me about a script Roddenberry had tried to revive without his approval. That was the Omega Glory, because, as I've talked about in previous live streams, no one at Star Trek really liked the Omega Glory except Roddenberry. He was pretty much the only one who thought that was a good script, which is why. And when he first proposed Star Trek to NBC, he had written about like 4 or 5 story ideas for episodes. The Cage, of course, was the one that got developed, but the Omega Glory was one of those. So it went back. It was literally one of the first 4 or 5 story ideas that was proposed, and yet it didn't get made into an episode till basically the waning days of the second season. And again, that was because really nobody liked the script except Roddenberry. Now, on December 6th, a very upset Stan Robertson wrote to Lucas, quote, "This will confirm our displeasure over having received, in piecemeal fashion, the above titled script, which you have scheduled for production without our approval. Your filming of the teleplay is at your own risk. This is to inform you that at the time of our viewing of the rough cut, we will exercise our option as to the acceptability or non acceptability of this property." In other words, we haven't given you permission to shoot this thing. And, you know, if we don't like the rough cut of it, then we may just kill this episode and it may not get made. So, it's on you if it doesn't happen. It was a small gamble. Lucas was confident that he had a winner in the Ultimate Computer, which he planned to safeguard by directing himself. Now, Stan Robertson was not the only one who was unhappy over the manner in which the rushed rewriting of the Ultimate Computer had taken place. During his third day of production on December 11th, a very upset Lawrence Wolf wrote to Gene Roddenberry with the following: "This letter is in reference to my script. After it was purchased, I was asked to make several changes, which I did over a period of 6 days. I was then led to believe it was satisfactory. Now I find that Dorothy Fontana has rewritten it, and she is to be given sole teleplay credit. I feel that I should have been notified if any other writer was at work on the script. At least it would have been good form to do so. Further, even though her changes are substantial, I feel I deserve to share teleplay credit with her." And so Roddenberry wrote a letter back trying to explain the situation. The Writers Guild, so Wolf filed a grievance with the Writers Guild Arbitration Board, and they wound up deciding against Lawrence Wolf and would not give him co writer credit. They gave him credit for the story, but not for the screenplay. Perhaps as a consolation prize or to protect his friendship with Ray Bradbury, Roddenberry purchased a second story from Wolfe called Galatea of Polydor. But at this point in the series, there was no need for more episodes because they had all the episodes they needed. Again, they thought they were going to be canceled. So he basically, it seems, just bought this story from Wolfe basically to preserve his friendship with Roddenberry, apparently. All right, now there were only two significant guest players in the Ultimate Computer, and no new sets were required. This allowed the episode to sail through pre production, even as the script was being finalized. 7 days were available, yet less than six were used. So, of course, the big star or guest star of this episode is William Marshall. Of course, we probably know William Marshall best as Blackula. That's probably what he's best known for, at least to most people. He was 43. He was a classically trained and experienced stage actor, as well as doing multiple films and television. Marshall had spent his career being cast as solemn authority figures, such as doctors, judges, and military officers, as well as detectives, African kings, African prime ministers, and oddball intellectuals. His greatest claim to fame came during the era of blaxploitation films. In 1972, he played the title character in Blackula, and again in '73 for its sequel, Scream Blackula Scream. Marshall's true love, however, was Shakespeare. And this is interesting. There was a direct-to-video version of Othello that was done in 1981, where I'm assuming he played Othello in it. I've never seen that. It would be interesting to check that out. And first, what Rogue 11 says, I wonder if Wolf is his real name. As far as I know, yeah, that is his real name. Again, this guy was a mathematician by trade. You know, he was not really a writer, so I don't think he had like a stage name or a pseudonym or anything. If it's not his real name, they don't mention it in here. And Jay Rocker says, although it was definitely ahead of its time, regarding technology, computers, AI. The episode is also groundbreaking because Daystrom is African American. Yeah, and they do. Actually, I'm about to talk about that here. About the rarity of having a computer genius played by a black man, especially 60 years ago. Marshall was immediately struck by the material. For a 1998 interview with Starlock, he said, "quote It was an extremely thought-provoking story and an extremely challenging role. Daystrom is a man of science and also a man of great morality, but he's also unaware that he is also a man of great arrogance. The concept of reasoning with a machine structured to one's own mind is a haunting one." Marshall knew the role being offered was a rare part for a black man on television in 1967. He said, quote, Roddenberry and company are to be lauded for welcoming the breakthrough, unquote. John Meredith Lucas said, quote, we were able to use a number of black actors in important parts at a time when the television screens were glaringly white. Roddenberry had already started this and was completely in favor of the practice. The Starship Enterprise was crewed by people of all races. Gene and NBC both urged minority involvement in the show, and this, after all, was the future where such racial acceptance would be considered just natural. But Marshall had been given the script only days before the start of production. He said, quote, it felt like I only had minutes to prepare. I had a lot of lines to learn. It was a last minute job, but I liked the role and the challenge it presented. Star Trek was a relatively rich experience. And Rogues 113, it said Star Trek was always at the forefront with the first kiss between a Caucasian and an African American. I've actually heard, I forget where, but it actually was not. That Kirk Uhura was not the first kiss. I forget where it took place, but it wasn't like a regular series. It was like in some TV movie, I think. So it was like a one-off. It was aired like one time, and that was it. So technically, it wasn't, but it certainly is the one that people know and remember because again, it was in a series and it got reruns forever. So I can't remember the name of the movie now, though. Now Barry Russo. So let me bring him up. And he should be a familiar face. Barry Russo was featured as Lieutenant Commander Giotto, who was the Enterprise's head of security back in Devil in the Dark. And he often worked on shows such as The Untouchables, 77 Sunset Strip, and The FBI. From 1964 through 66, he was a regular on the soap opera The Young Marrieds. Never heard of that one. Okay, and no, it's Ensign Harper. So, what's his name? Sean Morgan. So let me. So that's the ensign here who is adjusting the power and who eventually gets fried by the M5. Zap. So he played. Okay, yeah. So he played Lieutenant O'Neill back in Return of the Archons. But then in this episode, he's playing Ensign Harper. That's what he's called. And he would come back to Star Trek in the third season, and he would appear in the Tholian Web as well. Okay, so John Meredith Lucas directed this one. Where is it? There we go. And he was wearing two hats since he was the director, but he was also the show's showrunner, so he was the producer as well. The next two episodes, based on scripts by Roddenberry, were already in pre-production, with Roddenberry in charge of the latter of the two, which would be the Omega Glory, I guess. Okay, so William Marshall said that Shatner was a man whose head was way out to here. And then in parentheses, it says holding his hands wide apart. And yet all my scenes were with him. Leonard Nimoy playing Spock was appropriate casting. He was in some of my scenes, but he had little to say. He was quiet on and off camera. Unfortunately, Shatner was the talkative one. Everyone else was fine, cooperative, inventive, and inviting the best from each other and the guest stars. You sensed that they were creating family and that you had been invited into that family. And Rogues 1138 says, I was born at the end of the civil rights movement in 69 and discovered Star Trek in the 70s. I've been mesmerized ever since. Yeah, I was born in 68. In fact, this episode, it first aired, I think, in March, and then it got a rerun in the summer, and it was rerun very close to my original birthday, actually. So I was born in June of 68. Okay, now we were told before in Tomorrow is Yesterday, and if you recall, that's the episode where they go back in time to, what was then the present in the 1960s, and they meet that Air Force pilot. And in that episode, they were told that there were 12 ships in Starfleet, or 12 ships like the Enterprise, at least. Let's see, let me find an image of the other four ships here. There they are. Now, so 12 ships like the Enterprise in the fleet. So the Enterprise is one. Then there was the USS Constellation, which got destroyed in the Doomsday Machine. And then in this episode, we get the Lexington, the Hood, the Potemkin, and the Excalibur, which makes 6. Then in actually the very next episode, the Omega Glory, we'll hear about the Exeter, which makes 7. And then in season 3, we get the Defiant and the Tholian Web, which would make 8. And then ships that are mentioned but are never actually seen include Kirk's original ship, the Farragut, and the Intrepid. So that makes 10 of the original 12 Constitution classes, excuse me. Now, presumably, since it's a Constitution class, there probably was a USS Constitution, which would make 11. And that just leaves pretty much one ship whose name is not official. And I know if you go on the internet, and look, you'll find different lists that talk about what the original ships were, and they tend to have variations in each list. Now, one interesting note for this episode, of course, they had to redress the Enterprise bridge. Let me go the other way. There we go. So they redressed the Enterprise bridge to serve as the bridge of the Lexington. Now you'll notice that the chair that Wesley is sitting in, the back of the chair is much higher than Kirk's chair. And this is actually the chair they used as the captain's chair in Mirror Mirror, in the Mirror universe. Okay, now day 6 of filming. The company spent the entire day in the engineering room. Go back to the beginning here. Now, John Meredith Lucas's secretary, whose name was Andy Richardson, was actually there on set that day to see the filming. And she recalled, quote, Bill was working with a black actor named Bill Marshall, who was very tall. And Shatner called for the apple crate. So apparently there was an apple crate that Shatner would stand on sometimes when he was interacting with very tall actors. And he would stand on the apple crate when they had a 2-shot. Or Bill would want the scene staged in a way so that Bill Marshall was kneeling on the floor working on something or sitting in a chair or something like that, like in the original, the first scenes where they come in and he's sitting at the M5's chair or something like that. Bill was very protective of his screen image in that way, and of course Bill Marshall didn't think very highly of it. Quote, William Shatner was a bit of a bother, Marshall said. There was an ego there that I would rather not have had an experience with, unquote. Marshall was not saying that Shatner was unpleasant. To the contrary, he recalled, quote, he seemed to be very admiring of me, which is okay, but you get a little worried about that. All I care about is, will my exchange with this man be believable in the story? For the most part, it worked. And the final shots of the episode were that scene in Kirk's cabin. Let's see. Go back here. Oh, did I? Okay, maybe I. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. So these scenes in Kirk's cabin were the final ones shot. Rogue says he wasn't a basketball player or a football player, but an actor. He learned something every day. Well, yeah, William Marshall was a very accomplished actor, and he's one of the best guest stars they had on the show. I would say he's way up there, like with William Wyndham in the Doomsday Machine, for example. One of their best guest players, really. And as they said, he was very big into Shakespeare and that sort of thing. I'd like to see that Othello that he did. I wasn't even aware that existed. Okay, now here's an interesting thing. So in this scene here, of course, Kirk quotes a poem. He quotes that line, all I ask is a tall ship and a star to steer by. Now that line is from a poem called Sea Fever by a poet named John Masefield. Now I had always assumed this was some poem that was from back in like the 1800s, or 1700s or something, back in the age of sail, back before steam powered and later other mechanized ships. But actually, that's not the case. Masefield was a 20th century writer. And in fact, he died just 7 months before this episode was shot. So that was a contemporary poem, really, that he was quoting at the time. And of course, again, that line would be quoted again in Star Trek V. Okay, so in the ratings, and also this thing came in pretty much on budget, under budget and on time, which again, for Star Trek episodes was an exception rather than the rule. So when it aired on March 8th, 1968. And in the first half hour, it got a 26.4 audience share. This was second behind Gomer Pyle, as usual, and just barely ahead of the ABC show Operation Entertainment. And then the second half hour, it actually slid to third, 1 point behind Operation Entertainment. And number one in the ratings for the second half hour was the CBS Friday Night Movie. So, The Fast and Cheap Ultimate Computer is a well-regarded and popular episode. In 1998, William Marshall said, quote, "I've seen The Ultimate Computer 3 times over the years. It holds up extremely well in my judgment." NBC agreed and did not have to follow through on Stan Robertson's threat to reject the episode, which was rushed through the writing process without network approval. And again, it would get a repeat broadcast in June 1968, 3 months after it first aired. All right, so that'll do it for The Ultimate Computer. Now, the next episode will be the Omega Glory, as I've mentioned. And then after that, the final episode of the season, which is Assignment Earth. And then the week after that, which would be, I guess, well, let me see. Let me look at my schedule here. So the 13th will be the Omega Glory. 20th will be Assignment Earth. So now the weekend after that, I'm going to have that weekend, I'm going to be with my National Guard unit. So I probably won't have a Trek talk the week after that, which will be the 27th. Probably. So then it would be back, I'd be back on February 3rd. And at that point, what I'll do is I will do a sort of series in review episode, and I'll talk about the movement to get the show renewed, and save it for the second season, the fan movement led by Bijou Trimble and others to save the show and get a third season. And also I'll do probably a tier ranking of the episodes, again, like I did for the first season. And what else? So later this week, I should have my next video, which will be top 5 Marvel villains for Green Lantern, out. And then I'll probably live stream Sunday night as well. Please do like the stream before you go, if you would, and please do sub to the channel if you haven't already. And thank you to those who caught the stream live and those who will catch it on a rewatch. And I will see you all next time, folks. Have a good evening, and thanks for being here. Good night.